After that sneeze, I think I'll just keep a sufficient distance from all of you. I'm feeling fine. Today we celebrate the feast of Vianney, and today's readings are very appropriate because basically what Jesus is warning his disciples is, it's not necessary to follow the tradition of the elders in terms of externals, in terms of the washing of cups and materials before one eats. It's not the externals that really are important. It's not what you put into your mouth, but what comes out of the mouth. So basically what he's focusing on and underscoring for his disciples is really what comes out of the heart, what is genuine. It shows who you are in terms of your relationship with God. This is one of the problems with the Pharisees, because while they presented themselves as people of faith, that so often the focus was on these externals, and it's precisely what takes place here. How come they don't wash cups and dishes before they eat? This is a situation, I guess, that kind of affects so many of us, that when it comes to our relationship with God and our practice, sometimes it can be in terms of externals. I say this from experience because a good portion of my life was spent in a seminary as a teacher, and I was a teacher of scripture, and I loved that very much. But then the latter part of my time at the seminary, I was made the rector of the seminary, and that changed the direction of my time there. And one of the most serious things that had to be done was the evaluation of students for priesthood. And it was at those times, yet we had many more students than there are now. And very often, the situation was precisely this. There are always some who tend to focus, maybe because they were still very young or too young, or maybe not mature enough, on the externals. They liked a lot of the the vestments, for example, the focus on liturgical things, on external things, the focus on, who was made a Monsignor recently, or, what parishes priests would go to. And it used to really bother me when there were these groups of students when they emphasized so much these externals, because that's not what it's all about. It's a matter you practice your faith, how you show it in terms of word and actions, and how you share that and communicate that with people. That the challenge of presenting the faith requires something very important inside, something that's not easy to grasp, a certain spirit, a certain way of interacting and speaking, and really how you try to put your faith in somebody at the age of 18. Evaluation itself, but the person being evaluated really hadn't faced life yet. So it was a real challenge, but it was so important to try to determine how is this person, how he's going to relate with people. The faith that he shows minimally at a certain younger age, will that mature and grow into a genuine relationship? Not an easy thing to thread these meetings. It's not that I was making these decisions myself, but it was with a group of others, 7 or 8 who were involved in that. But it was always a difficult decision. And it's precisely what is talked about in today's Gospels. And very appropriately, today, we happen to celebrate the feast of St. John Vianney, who is presented as a model for priests. Interesting, John Vianney was not accepted into the seminary in France, in Ars in France, in that diocese, because he was very limited. He was very limited intellectually. He came across poorly when it came from an educational standpoint. As a matter of fact, he had to be coached before even coming into the seminary. And people really wondered whether this John Vianney would ever get through the seminary, because intellectually, he just didn't have it. He had a great deal of difficulty with Latin at that time, as we all did, I guess, at one time or another. But he just about got through the seminary. And it was basically because he had a certain sincerity and certain honesty and certain faith. There were no pretensions about him. He knew that he was not somebody who had the giftedness of speaking, of retaining, but he was a very good priest. And it's very interesting. When he was finally ordained, and some wondered how he was ever ordained, and he was assigned to a parish way out there where he wouldn't cause too many problems or make too many mistakes, in a little place called Ars, A-R-S. And in the early years of his life, as we read his life, he was making very little impact on the people, but what they recognized, that there was in him a sincerity, a faith, a trust in God that came across very simply, very honestly. And so that eventually he came to be received, not simply received, but accepted and sought after as a counselor of souls, as somebody who seemed to read into the inner portion, into the soul of an individual. And so at that time, in the 19th century and the 1800s, and so many people came to him for counsel, and especially for the sacrament of reconciliation, so that toward the latter portions of his life, he spent most of his time in a confessional, listening to people. People came from afar, because they sought this priest, this individual who seemed to have an inner flame, while he may not have been a sophisticated type, but somebody who could look into the souls of people and direct them. And his biographers after his life said that there were times that he would spend 8-9 hours, and sometimes even going without food, because people were coming from different areas. So the point of today's scriptures, and very appropriately, the feast of St. John Vianney, that just happened to come together, focuses on the importance of honesty, forthrightness, and really trying to respond honestly to the Spirit of God in our lives, so that who we are and what we do in our lives as parents, as grandparents, as husbands and wives, and that we basically try to live out our lives of faith, not in terms of prominent things, but basically in terms of honesty and love and forthrightness and staying at it. And I think especially in this time of pandemic, there are so many opportunities where we could put into practice in a very real, honest, and genuine way what our faith means to us.